Hi, Byron.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you today?
Very good, very good. One of those days you're glad to not be employed on Wall Street. Not
yeah, but if you had been employed on Wall Street all of this time, I mean, you'd really be okay, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, that's right.
I mean, last year's bonus,
right.
if you were prudent, would last you quite a long time.
I think if you'd been doing it for 20 years, you probably have more ups than downs.
Yes, you'd have enough for the rest of your life. But anyway,
if
you're
you were
right.
sensible about it.
if you were sensible about it.
They wouldn't be in this mess if they were sensible about it.
As we speak, our leaders are considering this $700 billion bailout plan, which, by the way, I understand it's not, necessarily $700 billion. I believe the legislation puts a ceiling of $700 billion, so it could be less than that.
Right. Paulson's proposal puts $700.
Exactly. This proposal. And it seemed interesting, in those extremely urgent seeming days of 72 hours ago.
Right.
This plan came out, and over the weekend, it seems like a lot of people took a deep breath, and certainly at the corner on NationalReview.com, you're seeing a fair amount of reservations and hold on a minute about this. What about you?
Oh yeah, you're seeing the same. You're definitely seeing the same thing on the left. I think Felix Salmon on Portfolio magazine said, just wrote something saying that he hadn't been able to find any bloggers or any writers who were basically positive about the plan, although everybody had a view that something had to be done. And maybe we'll see this as just Paulson's opening bid. Like, why not? If this has to go through congressional approval anyway, why not sort of bid for the most unlimited authority you can imagine and accept that it's going to get pared down a little bit. I mean, folks like Chris Dodd, who just came out with a much more different proposal of his own. They were kind of at the table at some of these discussions, so I'm sure Paulson kind of knows that going in for congressional approval is going to mean some changes. Maybe he just hoped he'd blast something through so incredibly fast that it would be completely open-ended.
No, I think I agree with you. There came a point last week, I guess, after the AIG thing, where they saw that this sort of ad hoc thing might not work for them, and that they wanted to commit some large pool of money to it. And darn, if you're going to spend $700 billion, you have to talk to Congress about that. So they came up with this thing, but really the proposal is quite stunning in parts. There's a clause that says that the Treasury Secretary's decisions to allocate funds in this matter are not reviewable by anybody.
Right.
So that's something you can kind of hit the delete button on, probably.
Right, and maybe it's one of those things that's larded up with so much garbage that they won't notice. They'll delete those things and won't notice the other things. It's my father-in-law is an architect. Told me this story once about when he was in architecture school, that when they had these reviews of their designs, you'd always put in sort of one obvious flaw that the professor would kind of notice, point out, say, "Oh yes, fix this," and they might not notice all the other flaws in the design. And maybe something like that provision for no review is part of that. Although maybe it's something they also feel very strongly about because they require the certainty. Maybe they believe they require the certainty of any deal. What struck me about it, I haven't really seen this pointed out, is that it's kind of an ongoing authority, obviously, for a period of time. And I don't, I'm willing to accept that the argument about moral hazard doesn't necessarily apply to everything that took place on Wall Street, because most of those folks at Lehman or whatever, they weren't acting with the expectation of being bailed out. I mean, probably most of them weren't saying, "Oh, I'll do this incredibly stupid, risky thing that I don't remotely understand, because what's the worst that happens? My firm goes belly up and we get bailed out by the government." I mean, that wasn't really a reasonable they just didn't know what they were getting into. But if you start this now as an ongoing process, what's the incentive for somebody now to, in one of these firms that's kind of halfway, that's Morgan Stanley or Goldman or some surviving entity? Now that there's this authority, there's a ton of moral hazard. So you sort of have to freeze everything in place, go in, make take what you're going to take and then move on. Otherwise, I think you have a lot of incentive for continuing bad behavior.
I think you do, and I think moral hazard is a huge issue in this. And one thing that bothers me about the proposal, it's kind of modeled loosely on the Resolution Trust Corporation that ended or that cleaned up after the savings and loan thing. But those savings and loans went bankrupt first.
Right.
They went belly up.
Right. They left these properties behind.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there was a need to make sort of an orderly disposition of these properties which still had values, just as a lot of these loans have value.
Right.
But there is a preemptive aspect to this, which is kind of weird, from my point of view.
Because it's intended to keep these businesses in business.
Right.
Because presumably Paulson can't imagine a world without Goldman Sachs in it.
Well, there you go. And I kind of can imagine that world. And I don't want the Treasury Secretary to be deciding which firms should exist and thus get preemptive support, and which firms should be kind of at the mercy of the market and will rise or fall depending on the wisdom of their policies up to that point.
Right.
So, I think fundamentally it's a problem. The only thing arguing in the favor of this thing is this idea that we're looking at Armageddon if we don't.
Right.
And I have to tell you, I'm completely unable to assess the danger of that.
Right.
To what degree will everything freeze up and we'll all die if this action is not taken?
Right. Well, I think it creates a profound political problem, which is almost similar to the problem that was created by the run-up to the Iraq War, which is, we could say this is completely undemocratic. To give the Treasury Secretary this power, the level of power that Bernanke already automatically has at the Fed. The critique of the Fed has always been a kind of populist democratic critique, that these are critical. These are the critical decisions about our lives and really should be subject to democratic review. Okay, great. But who among us has any ability to actually make a fully informed decision about what's the gap between something must be done and this Paulson plan? It's an incredibly difficult choice to make, and we're forced to make it because those folks on Wall Street got into stuff where they didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
So it's this essential mystery of what is in this $700 billion, what is in this authority, what is in this plan, what will these securities look like? The Resolution Trust Corporation, at least what the federal government ended up with was a bunch of shopping centers. You could see buildings that would say this building is for sale by the Resolution Trust Corporation.
Yeah, right.
They're not even. They're not. I'm not sure they're even going to have mortgages here. I think they're going to have these securities that are based on slicing up mortgages into little pieces.
Right. Have you noticed the number of articles by supposedly sophisticated financial reporters that essentially say these organizations came up with financial instruments that are difficult, if not impossible, for anybody to understand?
Right.
And I know I don't understand it, but you start off with the risky mortgage that's given out,
right,
and then that debt is sold to somebody else, who then securitizes it or cuts it into all sorts of different packages. Right. Sold to somebody else, who then may repackage it and sell it to somebody else. So you've got like 3 or 4 or 5 different steps here, and at the bottom of it all was a bad mortgage.
Right.
But I find it remarkable that nobody apparently has been able to explain in sort of case study way to take me. I remember there was a story years back where a reporter had bought a cow. Mm-hmm. And the deal was to buy the cow from its birth all the way to its trip to the slaughterhouse,
right,
and sort of take you through every step of what the cow did, and being fed corn and lots of antibiotics and all this stuff that happens in a lot of modern day meat production. It was a very interesting story. You took it from the very beginning all the way to the end. I think somebody needs to do a story at the risk of being incomprehensible. Taking something from a bad mortgage all the way to a 4th, 5th, 6th tier financial transaction that caused somebody else to collapse on the basis of this bad mortgage 6 transactions ago. It would help me understand it, and it doesn't give me any faith in either the financial people or the financial reporters.
That's right.
When they say there's all these incomprehensible deals going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sort of, here at the American.
This is my plea to you financial reporters out there.
Yeah, no, it's
buy the cow and do the whole story all the way through the bank collapse.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think the mortgage begins to slip away very quickly into the mists, and it would be good to actually see that. The book by Charles Morris captured a little of that in a little bit of a clearly written way, but there's very few reporters who can write that way. I mean, Roger Lowenstein sometimes writes in the Times Magazine, can do that. Maybe really just a handful of others. I mean, I keep thinking about it's like 23 years ago, well over 20 years ago since Michael Lewis's book Liar's Poker came out.
Right.
And if you remember, I don't know if you remember, if you read that book. I mean, that was the beginning. What he was in on was the beginning of taking a mortgage and slicing off the principal payment and the interest payment and putting each in a different security. Well, we must be light years beyond that now. I mean, they must have all the people. If people had a mortgage with a balloon payment, I bet the balloon payment was in one security, which would be very risky, and then the other payments would be in some other thing. I'm just curious how the Treasury. Suppose the Treasury wants to actually help people renegotiate their mortgages. I don't think they're even going to. They're not going to hold them to renegotiate it because they're just going to hold one piece of it.
Well, you're absolutely right. So the bottom line is we don't know what the hell we're talking about on that.
We don't. We should admit. I have a long record on Blogging Heads of talking about things I don't know what I'm talking about, and commenters will happily note that that was correct. But we do know something.
So let's move on to the politics of something.
We do know something about the politics of it. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, first of all, as we speak, neither campaign has really come down on this bailout package for quite reasonable reasons, because the bailout package, other than this 3-page document proposed by the Secretary of the Treasury, hasn't been written yet. So, but I was on a conference call with the McCain campaign this morning, and they very clearly declined to commit themselves on whether McCain would actually support this package, thus leaving open the door that he would not support it.
Right.
So both McCain and Obama are going to have to do this. I would say that one thing that McCain has gotten out of this, which for all the hits he's taken about being a deregulator, is that there was this crisis at Fannie Mae a few years ago, I think in 2004, that produced a stinging report from OFHEO, the federal agency that overlooked looked into Fannie Mae, and a number of people, senators, proposed reform legislation for Fannie Mae and said this is dangerous, this is trouble, watch out, and it died in the Senate, mostly due to Democratic opposition. So that's one thing, it seems to me, in which McCain has some cred and can come out and say, "Hey, I did this," but they wouldn't listen.
Well, that wasn't his legislation.
He was a co-sponsor, I believe.
He co-sponsored it. Well, Rick Davis was also paid $2 million to lobby for Fannie Mae.
That's right. There was a group of 19
one of those shell organizations that he seems to wind up as the director of all the time.
There was a group of 19 organizations that included Fannie Mae and Freddie.
And was
financed by
$30,000
a month, I believe,
yes.
Which is good. Good. Like to do that. $30,000 a month to be their president. So anyway, you do have that argument that your campaign manager was this. But on the other hand, what I was saying is an actual substantial thing that McCain himself, in his role as senator, tried to do.
Mm-hmm. Right, and
so that's good for him. And the other question is, what is Obama's record on this issue?
Well, Obama gave a speech on financial regulation, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months ago, which was really well done. And I'm often very critical of his domestic policy proposals. Have often been, kind of on the edge of sloppy, as with his health care plan and so forth. This was probably one of the most solid of his domestic proposals that I've seen, and it had this very clear kind of principle of regulation, which is you should be regulated on the basis of what you do rather than what you are, which has to be the foundation of any future regulation, so that people aren't playing the game of, they're doing something that's typical commercial banking business, but by calling themselves an investment bank or an insurance company or something else, they're regulated in an entirely different way. I mean, that's obviously the cornerstone of future regulation. That speech was very thorough. I haven't had a chance to look yet at the speech he gave a couple hours ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was kind of a reprise of it. So I think his record has been strong. I mean, most of these issues haven't come up. The Fannie Mae issues haven't come up while he's been a senator. But I think I'd give a lot of credence to that speech, and some of the people who've advised him, like Dan Tarullo, have a very good sense of what the new regulatory order is. So I defend Obama on this. I think McCain. What's interesting to me is McCain's always gone straight for who are the bad guys, who are the good guys. He gave that speech last week, and then it fed into an ad where he said, honest people on Wall Street will always have a friend in John McCain. But we're going to get rid of greed. We're going to get rid of the bad actors. Well, the honest people on Wall Street are greedy too. It's not like the difference between who survived and who didn't survive was that one was greedy and one wasn't. And it seems to me this sort of bad good distinction is not always that useful in looking at what happened here. You have a certain kind of deregulatory environment. And things are going to happen, whether the people on Wall Street are angels or Gordon Gekko, and so I'm pretty. I think that Obama's analysis here has been very structural, whereas McCain's has been very personal.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I'll say in regard to what you said first was when I asked you what Obama's record on this is, you referred to a speech that he gave 3 or 4 months ago. And which is perfectly reasonable because he just doesn't have, if we define record as things that he's actually done, he doesn't have much of a record on this, just as he doesn't really have a whole lot of a record on anything else. I do think he was involved in this, the killing this Fannie stuff in 2005, which would have been his first year in the Senate. But I think that this is a consistent problem for Obama supporters.
Killing it as in he didn't co-sponsor it, or killing it as in he filibustered it, or what?
I think he voted against it. I think that's the way. But the other thing is, on the record of bad and good, I think you make a good point about McCain, because this is McCain's visceral reaction. And he ignited a lot of criticism in the conservative world for his kind of knee-jerk call to fire Chris Cox, head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is very popular with conservatives and is generally thought to be doing a pretty good job, I think. So you have this problem come up, and McCain's initial reaction is get rid of Chris Cox, and it seemed kind of like shooting at the hip. I'm not going to defend it. I do think it's kind of like McCain, and my only guess is it basically comes from his Navy background, which is, something goes wrong. It doesn't matter if it's your fault or not. You're the captain. You're out of there. There was an incident many years ago. I think it was off California, where an aircraft carrier actually ran aground, which is a major mistake.
Right.
And I don't think that the captain was actually in the area of the wheel at that point. But hey, it ran aground, and he was out of there. I think McCain has this sort of reaction to things. That's not always the best thing. On the other hand, I will say that the one word that seems to resonate the most with undecided voters these days is accountability. In Denver and in Minneapolis, Frank Luntz had focus groups of undecided voters.
Right.
And in each place, in Denver they were all Colorado, and St. Paul they were all from Minnesota. So we had these swing state undecided voters, and the thing they really wanted to see the most in the next administration was accountability.
Right.
So the question was, well, what do you mean by that? And because, on the far left, they mean basically putting the whole Bush administration on trial, And in the more of the center, it means maybe you don't spend my money unless you tell me where it's going. But there's this feeling that things have gone wrong and nobody's had to pay for it up until now. And I don't know how this call to fire Chris Cox to the degree that the public cares about it. I don't know whether it's working or not. I wouldn't say that the public is having the same reaction that the conservatives inside Washington who had.
Right. No, he's not. He's not a beloved figure.
Yeah, right. So it may be that the public hears that McCain, you've got this crisis. McCain calls for the head of the SEC, calls for the head's head, and people may react positively to that. I really don't know, and as a matter of fact, I'd like to know more because it's something that I think is probably playing differently out in the world than it is right here in Washington.
Right. Well, and also each little episode like this passes quickly and may not play in the world at all. I mean, we may, we saw it written up in the Politico or whatever. It may not have that much significance at all. But I think that's part of. I've always thought that's a certain part of McCain's appeal. Is part of what makes somebody seem like a straight talking person is when they're really blunt about, I love this guy. This guy's a jerk. The jerks he kicks out of his office, the others he's very loyal to, and yet it's not built on any kind of permanent. George Bush has sort of the same attitude, but it's based on a much firmer, more constant moral foundation. Whereas McCain sort of zigs and zags in his likes and dislikes.
There's no doubt.
Sorry,
there's no doubt about that, and he has, since he has decided to push change and reform more, he seems to be emphasizing his personal characteristics on that even more.
Right.
And, I don't know if it's selling or not. Obviously, with the Palin announcement, he did forfeit a little bit of the experience argument. Mm-hmm. So, and he's running on the kind of more familiar, more comfortable ground of I'm a Teddy Roosevelt reformer. Whether people are buying that, I just don't know. But
I mean, there's just a say anything quality sometimes to these things. I mean, apparently yesterday he suggested that you'd fire Chris Cox and replace him with Andrew Cuomo, the Attorney General of New York, which is a pretty strange pick. Especially as you can see a pretty good argument that the period when Cuomo was at Housing and Urban Development at the end of the Clinton administration was really where the seeds for a lot of this were planted. I'll say that in a very nonpartisan way.
I think the conservative reaction to the Cuomo comment was, I guess the charitable reaction was that it was insane. I don't know what the non-charitable reaction was. It was one of those jaw-dropping things. Did he just say that? I mean, really? So it was. I think it's pretty clear that the next president is going to have one or two members of the opposing party in his cabinet, but I just wouldn't expect it to be Andrew Cuomo.
Right. Nor would I. I mean, that wouldn't even. He's hardly he's hardly my favorite. Democrat.
Wow, just an amazing thing to come out of McCain's mouth. So anyway, now onto this election thing. Palin mania.
Right.
So do I take it that you're losing your enthusiasm for her now?
I'm still very
happy with the choice.
I'm still very pro Palin, but getting
That's
a little tired of it.
Well, look, I mean, the bounce seems to have disappeared. Right. McCain is back in the tracking, 4 or 5 points behind daily. So the Palin bounce has disappeared, but I do think we have this report of Palin getting a very large crowd. Some reports said 60,000, others said just tens of thousands, but still a big crowd in the Villages, this big retirement community in Florida.
Uh-huh.
And I guess it was just last week, it seems like longer ago, but maybe it was just last week that McCain and Palin appeared together in Fairfax, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, which allowed some of us who haven't been traveling at the moment to get out and see them in action. And here again, there was some dispute on the crowds. McCain people said 23,000, others said somewhat less, but it was no doubt that it was big, and I think it was the biggest crowd McCain had ever gotten in this campaign. And I know driving up to it, it was like approaching an Obama event. When you approach an Obama event, I'm serious. You approach an Obama event, you see this line, and it's like 3 or 4 people wide, and it just snakes for a long.
And did the beam of sunlight come down upon the stage and all that?
Yes, right. That's right. And there was a rainbow actually at that very moment.
40 doves floated up in the air.
And the line just snaked, and I went in off the road into a neighborhood and got lost, and the line was snaking through there too. So it was the crowd was positively Obama-esque. Not 80,000 people at Invesco Field, but still big. And I think the thing to remember about Palin mania, if it is indeed fading in the polls, the deal for McCain was he still had a lot of problems with his base, and there was and there really still is an irreducible minimum of Republicans who just can't stand the guy.
Right.
But some of those, and probably a large number of those, really like Palin. And with this choice, he has made himself, John McCain, palatable to them and has made them enthusiastic. And I've talked to a bunch of people who said, I have gone from vowing to sit this one out to calling up the campaign to volunteer because of Palin. So Palin mania was, I know there's all this talk about getting Hillary women and everything else, but a lot of Palin mania was to get the base, which he didn't have.
Right.
So I think Palin mania in that sense is still in effect.
I think that's right. I mean, and I think the idea that this was going to reach moderate Hillary supporters, swing voters, I think that was always pretty crazy. As time wore on, I think some of them found her kind of personally appealing, found the idea appealing, but I think it fades quickly. And there's no question that injection of enthusiasm was necessary for McCain, but he's not going to is not sufficient to change the election. I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that, but just to get that little boost of enthusiasm, you are actually paying a pretty high price in giving up experience and also actually alienating a certain kind of swing voter who could be comfortable with McCain. I mean, the classic swing voter that people go after in every election is the suburban Ohio, relatively affluent, pro-choice woman who has often voted Republican, is comfortable with McCain, believes him to be basically pro-choice or not, very zealous on the issue. This is a real reminder that, this is not your party anymore. But I think McCain had no choice but to pick Palin. He had to sort of find the future of the Republican Party, and it's hard to find, Well,
let me ask you about one type of swing voter, or maybe not really a swing voter, but I'm not sure where they're going to be now, is, during the Pennsylvania primary, for example, I went up there and covered both Obama and Hillary. And at Hillary rallies, especially in the famous areas of western Pennsylvania, talked to a lot of people who were there at the rally that were Hillary supporters and asked each one of them, if Obama is the nominee, will you vote for him? Mm-hmm. And about half of them said no.
Right.
And some of them quite emphatically. Now, it could have been that they were just caught up in the moment, the heat of the race.
Right. These are women or both?
Men and women.
Yeah.
Or it could be, and most of the reasons they gave were inexperience.
Right.
And I remember one guy saying, you could have somebody who says he's going to build you a house, and he says he's going to build you just the best house in the world, and you give him money, and you do all this stuff, and then you find out he's not a builder. He doesn't know how to do it. So the question is, are these people all going to come around, or are they not going to vote, or would some of them be actually attracted by Sarah Palin?
Right.
Not sure the answer about that, but I don't think it's a closed question.
Right. I'm not sure the answer about it either. I do know that, obviously the experience you had, a lot of reporters had that in Pennsylvania and in Ohio and in Kentucky and so forth. But the polls still haven't showed it. I mean, among people who identify as Democrats, Obama is still is in the high 80s. He doesn't have any significant more attrition among self-identified Democrats than Gore or Kerry have had, who also had trouble with those same working class voters in those areas.
Yeah, but I think I should check Real Clear Politics while we're doing this, but I think the polls in Pennsylvania are still really fairly close. And if I remember correctly, Kerry ended up winning it by a pretty substantial.
Yeah, he won it by about 3 points. No, I mean Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania and Michigan are both states where Obama has definitely not closed the deal yet. And
yeah,
I think there are aspects
of
Palin that are appealing in that group. I mean, obviously, if that's the case, then when people said they weren't going to vote for Obama because of inexperience, that was kind of a code for something else.
Could be.
Which is not necessarily race, actually. I mean, it could be. I mean, there is a sort of, there is a kind of the slightly distanced, a little bit professorial, that tendency to sometimes analyze a problem rather than getting in and telling you what the fight is. It's a problem in a way that both Kerry and Gore had in their own ways, and Palin's a little different because Palin she is who she is.
And the other thing I think of as just a possibility is that Palin might increase McCain's appeal in Colorado and Nevada, because I'm not from the West. Are you?
I am not.
No, okay, but when you go out there, they will speak quite seriously of our Western values.
Right.
We want to make sure that we preserve our Western values, and they're very important. And I think Palin has a lot of that.
She does have a lot of that, although our Alaska values is a little different from our Western values. I mean, it's
well, I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but my guess is that they will that there will be some voters who will look more favorably.
Well, I think
I don't know.
There's a common theme to John McCain's Arizona and Sarah Palin's Alaska and a couple of those other states, where what Western values means is the deep-seated belief that we built all this stuff on our own and nobody helped us and government doesn't have anything to do with our lives. And meanwhile they turn on the water and it comes from the Hoover Dam or every bit of Alaska was basically built by federal government money. I mean, it's the great irony of Western values, of course, is that.
Well, in fact, if they do believe that, whether or not you find it persuasive, that might help Palin and it might help McCain with them. So the other area where I leave Palin as a possible help with people who are not in the Republican base. Is out west.
It's possible, but I mean, I think we're now. It's pretty clear that we're going to have a pretty steady flow of stories every day about some wacky thing that went on in Sarah Palin's Alaska or in Wasilla when she was mayor. You're going to have Troopergate stories, kind of on and on. You're going to have a debate, which it's just after a while people are going to say, I like her, she's appealing. There is a minimum level of what you expect in a vice president, and she actually doesn't cross it.
All right, which leads me to my question: is why aren't we seeing, if not a similarly steady stream of stories, at least some stories about Joe Biden and his past? In my view, I mean, he has not been a serious candidate for president in 20 years. I don't think any of the networks or his opposition in the Democratic Party took him that seriously as a candidate this year to do a full vet, or as the opposition researchers say, to do a dig on him.
Right.
And I don't get the sense that anybody's doing a dig now. I mean, that may be because, I forget which website said this, that maybe because they're all dumpster diving in Alaska. But I do find this lack of attention to Biden to be kind of perplexing. Have you even noticed that? Is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess. I mean, it's interesting that you put it that way. I mean, I think you're right that he wasn't that serious a candidate for president this year. There was a cadre that believed he might break through, but. Not that it was worth doing the kind of investigating that they did, even of Edwards. Although he has been vetted for the vice presidency at least once before, and I'm not sure that there's that. I mean, and there's no question about it. The McCain campaign did not properly vet Sarah Palin. I mean, the thing I sort of enjoy watching about some of these little stories is like, they don't know what they don't know, And I think the Obama campaign did properly vet Biden, and of course you have Senate financial disclosure records. I mean, you have a level of basic disclosure over 30 years that you don't have about the governor of Alaska, and there's no doubt in anyone's mind that Joe Biden is not a wealthy person. He's not.
Let me. I'm going to get to that in just a second, but let me ask you, since you mentioned Palin again, other than Troopergate, which the McCain people were quite aware of. What do you think is the biggest, most damaging story that has arisen about Palin that it's your guess that has been a surprise, that the McCain people just didn't know about?
Well, I imagine I would be surprised if they knew about the ties to Alaska Independence Party.
Yeah, but she wasn't a member of that. That was an erroneous report in the New York Times.
Well, it was
Todd had been a member.
Right, but there's no need to be a member of the Alaska Independence Party. Her husband was a member. She spoke. She sent a video greeting to their conference. I mean, there is a tie to this Alaska First culture there. I think it's the firing everybody, the firing everybody in Wasilla. Do you think they knew all that?
Yeah, I think they did.
Okay. Well,
I don't think it... Well, look, I'm not saying they knew everything about her or that they did a extremely thorough vet over a relaxed period of time. On the other hand, I don't think anything other than Troopergate, which they knew was coming up, I don't think anything has popped up since to surprise them. There's been a lot of that's been serious. I mean, there's a lot of the bad vibes about Palin. If you read the stuff on the left, is people believe that she wants to teach creationism in school, which is not correct, and people believe that she's opposed to any sort of sex education in school, which is also not correct. But these aren't like big killer political issues. So when you brought up that
right. I don't know that each one of those is a big killer political issue. I mean, there are quotes that go. Most of the quotes on creationism are the teach both things quotes. So there are definitely some things like that. But there are other things. I mean, obviously, I think we've gotten to the bottom of the book banning incident, which is that she asked about banning the particular Daddy's Roommate book and didn't actually get around to banning it.
Right.
And that's disturbing.
Now on Biden.
All right, Biden, big crook, the big
bee that is in my
Amtrak
bonnet,
riding crook.
The bee that is in my bonnet about Biden at the moment is not that this is a huge story, not that it's a front page story, but it is, as you know, common practice when candidates release their tax returns for newspapers to look and report, among other things, how much they gave to charity. This has been a big thing as far back as you want to go. Certainly the press was interested in it with Dick Cheney. They were very interested in it with Al Gore, who one year, I believe, had contributed like $360 or $300, some small amount of money, although the year before he had contributed, I believe, $35,000 in the proceeds from a book. So there you have that. But anyway, they were interested in it. Biden, I believe on maybe the 12th of September, releases 10 years of tax returns, 1998, 2007. And they show charitable giving that is far, far below the American sort of national average on this. For example, in the year 1999, when the Bidens had adjusted gross income of $210,000, Biden gave $120, or reported giving $120 to charity. In 2002, with adjusted gross income of $227,000, they gave $260 to charity. In 2004, let's go to 2005, with adjusted gross income of $321,000, reported charitable giving of $380. As a matter of fact, for 9 of the 10 years involved, with income that went as high as $320,000, they never reported giving more than $380 to charity. And this, in some cases, is less than 1/16%. In no case, I think, is more than 1/4% or even that much. I'm told that the average American household gives about 2% of their adjusted gross income. So, I'm not saying that this is a stop the presses, lead the show story, but I saw a piece in the Washington Post about Biden's tax returns.
Right.
And it didn't mention it. And I just wonder, and I haven't seen it reported in many other places. I wrote a story myself on it because I hadn't seen it.
Right. I saw it. That counts.
What's the deal with it? It does count. But what's the deal with this? I think this is another example of, I think the press and the establishment just thinks, well, we know Joe. I mean, gosh, Joe's been around forever. We know Joe. I mean, there's no reason to go, diving into his garbage cans in the back of his house. Come on. So,
right.
And they're just not looking. I don't get it.
Well, I mean, I think the story is what it is. He doesn't give as much to charity as a person should or as average people do. I mean, it is interesting when you see those tax returns. I mean, all those numbers are consistent with a U.S. senator and a working spouse who actually have no income other than their salaries, and a little bit of investment income, and very minor book royalties and stuff like that. I mean, that Joe Biden is one of the poorest members of the U.S. Senate.
Well, it is true, but I think we should say that in those 10 years, the lowest adjusted gross income of the Bidens, Joe and Jill Biden, was $210,797. That was in 1999. And the highest was $321,379 in 2005. So, I mean, the poverty case is, for most Americans, the poverty case is not particularly
I'm not making the poverty case to explain the charitable giving. I mean, one should give more. I also think, there are also differences in whether people, account for every little, gift of clothing and things like that. I mean, I remember once seeing the Clintons' tax returns where Hillary Clinton had marked out, each, a bag of the Salvation Army, and each item was valued. And it was a little silly, actually. I mean, some people really go to silly lengths to max out their charitable contributions, and some people are actually a little more casual about reporting those. So I'm not, and I don't know anything about the Biden's tax returns, and I haven't seen their response on that. I'm just saying it's not necessarily the measure of everything. All I'm saying about the income is it is, to me, in a world where people are running lots of scams and lots of senators have lots of shit that's putting money in there, we will now not be on the New York Times website with this blogging heads, but when people have a lot of other funny sources of income that's supplementing their senatorial salary, here's one of a very, very few guys who doesn't and never has and doesn't seem to have fallen to any of the temptations of which often befall politicians who are around wealthy people all the time and start to think, Why am I not living like that? Why am I not living like Ron Burkle or somebody like that? And there are many ways for that to start happening. So that's sort of all I'll say in his defense. I'm more interested in that aspect of the tax returns than I am in the specific number on charitable giving. Although it should, yes, you should give more to charity. So should I.
All right. Well, I'm not going to press the charity part any beyond what I have.
Yeah.
But I'm going to press it only as an example of there not being, I think, a critical enough attitude among some in the press toward Biden, and I do believe there is this idea that, since he has been around Washington forever, that just everybody knows Joe. And,
right.
And Palin is obviously the hot new thing, and they've all gone off to Alaska, and they find it amazingly exotic, and I think in the words of Slate, weirder than you thought. And so I think it's creating a real imbalance in coverage. And I know Biden has been kind of I don't know if you want to call them full-fledged gaffes, but he says some wacky things. I mean, this stuff that he said the other day about don't believe that, you better not believe that Barack Obama is going to take your shotgun away. They're just trying to scare you. He's not going to do that. And if he goes after my Beretta, he's going to have a problem. I mean, just kind of weird stuff.
Yes,
that if Biden were getting more attention, might make a little bit of news, and at some point, who knows, somebody might even ask Barack Obama about it. But since there is this kind of, I saw a reporter the other day at the grocery store, and we were talking about some of this Biden stuff, including the tax returns, and they said, look, nobody's interested. It's just so there's this belief that nobody's interested, and since nobody's interested, then you don't have to actually do any coverage.
Right.
And also, they can save money by not putting anybody on Biden's plane, which is apparently empty these days,
right.
the press section.
Right. But everything's required. I mean, if Biden says something really stupid that really reflects negatively on the ticket, it will not be neglected. If he says something just a little off, well, that's Biden, and I think people accept that. I mean, I actually find some of it almost at certain times endearing. In the case of Biden, but let's point out the original beneficiary, the original beneficiary of this. Oh, we know this guy. We know him. We've known him. Is John McCain, of course. I mean, spent the spring.
McCain did the one thing he did do in 2000 and for a while this year. Was he offered the press, and this is no longer, but he offered the press so much access that people knew that he was just, even if you had your recorder going on him, I mean, he was just thinking loud and going all over the place, and people did cut him a little slack because they could see him talking at great length, talking at such length that reporters would actually walk away. Right. Which would not happen today with either him or Obama. Right. So there was, I think, a certain. They gave him a little bit of slack there, but that was simply because they heard so much from him.
Well, they gave, but I mean, even on specific things. Like I spent some time in the spring trying to point out that McCain's evasion of the campaign finance system, sort of being halfway in, taking a loan based on being in, and then getting out of the public financing system, in effect getting the benefits without the restrictions, was an outrageous thing to do. But the presumption of McCain as straight-talking campaign finance reform maverick was so lodged in the press's assumptions that really it took a long time for anyone to pick up on that. And I think that's very similar to what you're pointing out about Biden. It's very hard to tell people something, to convince people of something that they've already decided is not true. And I think that's been part of the Obama campaign's struggle with McCain, is that there are a lot of things about the McCain brand that Obama sort of has to assume are just sort of established, and it'll be too expensive and take too long to break those, even if they have nothing to do with the reality of Senator McCain. You're sort of saying the same point about Biden, but I think that's on a much smaller scale than McCain.
Well, I think it shouldn't be as hard to get the press to reassess their assumptions as it is the public. I mean, the public certainly does have general ideas about candidates, and it would take probably an earthquake to change some of those. Mm-hmm. But as far as the press is concerned, I mean, I think they should always ask themselves, why am I thinking this? How do I know what I think I know in this case? Right. So anyway, that's my little shtick on Biden, which I think brings us to the end. I think we will,
and I think we will just, as the lawyers say, we will stipulate that Joe Biden should give more to charity, and the press should pay more attention.
If that's the only good that comes of this blogging heads, then it will have all been worth it.
All worthwhile, even though it caused me to use a bad word, and we will probably not. This episode may never be aired. All right.
Great to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you, Byron. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye-bye.